When trainers begin their journey across Galar, most expect to catch common Pokémon with relative ease, slowly filling their Pokédex as they travel from one route to the next. Yet hidden in the early game waters lies one of the hardest catches in the region, a creature that appears plain on the surface but has a reputation for being one of the most elusive in the franchise. That Pokémon is Feebas. Known since its debut for being difficult to encounter, it carries that reputation into Galar, where it can be found only under very strict circumstances. In this region, the only place to encounter it naturally is on Route 2, specifically by fishing in the lake near Professor Magnolia's house. At first, this seems straightforward after all. Fishing is one of the simplest mechanics in the game, but unlike Magikarp, Goldeen, or other aquatic Pokémon that appear often, this one has a minuscule chance of biting the line. The encounter rate sits at around 1%, meaning that a trainer could cast dozens of times without ever seeing it. The sheer improbability of success is what makes this Pokémon so infamous in Galar. It is not hidden behind unusual tiles or elaborate weather patterns as in earlier regions, but instead locked away by low probability that tests even the most patient players. Many who attempt the hunt describe the experience as repetitive, sitting by the waters of Route 2 and casting endlessly. Each splash brings a flicker of hope, only to be dashed when another Magikarp emerges. The rarity turns what should be a relaxing mechanic into a marathon of persistence. For new players unaware of the odds, the process can feel confusing and even unfair. Yet for those who finally reel one in, the sense of accomplishment is immediate. The catch feels like proof of determination, a reward for enduring countless, fruitless attempts. The challenge does not end at capture. To evolve into Melodic, this Pokémon must be traded while holding a prism scale, an item that is not handed out casually. Players need to either find the item in the wild or receive it through special methods, and then arrange a trade. For those who play solo or lack easy access to online features, this requirement can be as daunting as the fishing itself. The need for cooperation emphasizes the theme of rarity, making the journey from Feebas to Milotic a two-step trial of patience and resourcefulness. The lore and symbolism behind this Pokémon add depth to its difficulty. Though it begins as one of the plainest and least appealing designs in the Pokédex, it evolves into Milotic, a creature celebrated for elegance and beauty. The transformation reflects themes of perseverance and growth, echoing tales like the ugly duckling becoming a swan. In Galar, this story resonates strongly because of the extra effort needed to find the base form. The evolution becomes more meaningful when it follows such a hard-fought battle against chance. Competitive players valued Melodic for its defensive presence and ability marvel scale, which boosts resilience when afflicted by status. Owning one meant more than just filling a Pokédex entry. It could become a cornerstone of a team. But because obtaining the base form was such a trial, not every player could easily add Melodic to their roster. This exclusivity only enhanced the prestige of owning one, reinforcing the idea that rarity should come with reward. Community myths often arose around the fishing process. Some claimed that casting the line in specific corners of the lake improved odds, while others insisted that the number of times one reeled in Magikarp influenced the chance of eventually finding Feebas. None of these theories held true, but they illustrate how randomness encourages folklore. The very act of searching becomes a story worth sharing, with each failed cast deepening the anticipation for the eventual success. Ultimately, the difficulty of catching this Pokémon in Galar lies in its low odds and its demanding evolution method. Trainers who persist are rewarded not only with a beautiful and powerful partner, but also with a story of patience that connects them to a wider tradition of players across generations. For many, reeling in Feebas on Route 2 becomes one of the defining memories of their journey, a reminder that sometimes the rarest treasures are hidden in the simplest places. In the northern stretches of the Galar region, trainers often hear tales of a spectral dragon that lurks by the lakeside. It is a creature both haunting and mysterious, known for drifting quietly above the water before darting away with surprising speed. That Pokémon is Dreepy. Despite its small, almost unimposing form, it has earned a place among the hardest encounters in Galar, thanks to its extremely scarce appearances and the complicated weather mechanics that govern when it can be found. This Pokémon can only be encountered in the Lake of Outrage, one of the most challenging locations to reach early in the adventure. The area is blocked off by a body of water that requires the Rotom bike's water riding upgrade to cross, meaning that trainers must progress significantly in their journey before even having the chance to look for it. When they finally arrive, the encounter rates are astonishingly low. In fact, it rarely appears in tall grass at all, and when it does, the chances are slim enough to leave many players empty-handed after hours of searching. The overwhelming majority of encounters in the area are with more common dragon or dark-type Pokémon, which makes finding this elusive ghost dragon a true test of persistence. The difficulty is compounded by the weather system in Galar. Unlike earlier regions, where encounters were determined mostly by location and time of day, this land introduces dynamic weather patterns that directly impact which Pokémon appear. Dreepy is heavily tied to foggy or overcast weather, which are among the rarest conditions to naturally occur. This means that players not only have to reach the Lake of Outrage, but also must wait for the correct weather cycle or manipulate the system by adjusting their Switch's date settings. Many trainers who were unaware of this mechanic found themselves wandering the lake for days without success, only later realizing that the weather was the true gatekeeper. The rarity of this Pokémon has another layer of irony, given that it eventually evolves into Dragapult, one of the most powerful pseudo-legendaries of the entire series. The idea that a creature so small and elusive could become a towering dragon capable of firing its offspring from its head in battle creates an interesting contrast. Trainers who put in the time to locate one are rewarded with not only the thrill of discovery, but also the potential to raise one of the strongest competitive battlers in Galar. Dragapult's blistering speed and versatile move pool quickly made it a favorite in ranked battles, which only increased the demand for its unevolved form. In fact, the scarcity of this Pokémon drove entire communities online to develop hunting strategies. Some advised waiting for specific in-game dates that increased the odds of foggy weather, while others recommended camping in certain corners of the tall grass where encounters seemed marginally more likely. Players compared notes and shared screenshots of their rare finds, creating a sense of shared accomplishment when one finally appeared. The rarity gave it an almost mythical reputation, with some comparing the experience of seeing it emerge from the grass to catching a glimpse of a legendary Pokémonday. The design of this line is rooted in unique inspiration, combining elements of ghostly spirits with the sleek frame of a stealth bomber. In lore, it is said to be the spirit of a prehistoric creature reborn in spectral form, wandering aimlessly until it attaches itself to a trainer who shows it care. This concept of a lost soul fits well with the frustration of its search. It feels as though the Pokémon itself wants to remain unseen, drifting in and out of the mist only when conditions align just right. That thematic connection enhances the sense of mystery around its rarity, making the eventual capture feel like a supernatural event as much as a gameplay achievement. From a storytelling perspective, the hunt for this Pokémon also highlights one of Galar's core design philosophies: to blend natural landscapes with immersive systems that create unpredictability. Weather becomes not just a visual effect, but a meaningful mechanic that influences which creatures thrive in certain areas. The fact that this particular Pokémon hides behind one of the rarest weather states shows how deliberately the designers tied its identity to the region's new systems. By doing so, they created an encounter that felt special and tied to Galar in a way that could not have been replicated in earlier generations. Culturally, players often share stories of the exact moment they finally encountered one. For some, it appeared suddenly after days of disappointment, sparking disbelief and excitement in equal measure. For others, the encounter came while casually exploring, leading to a moment of shock when they realized what had just emerged from the grass. In both cases, the Pokémon carried with it a feeling of rarity that few others in the region could match. It wasn't just another addition to the Pokédex, it was proof of perseverance or sheer luck, and in either case, it became a memorable part of the journey. Competitive players also valued it immensely, not only for its evolution, but for the sheer bragging rights of raising one from its earliest stage. Having a Dragapult on a team often signaled to opponents that the trainer had put in extra effort, and while breeding could make it easier to obtain more copies once one was captured, the initial hunt remained a badge of honor. It was a way of saying, "I found it, and I earned this powerhouse." That prestige made its rarity feel justified, as if the games themselves wanted trainers to appreciate the significance of the line. Ultimately, the difficulty of catching this Pokémon in Galar is not just a matter of numbers or mechanics. It's about the atmosphere of the Lake of Outrage, the uncertainty of weather, and the thrill of watching a faint silhouette finally emerge from the mist. The scarcity transforms what might otherwise be just another small dragon into an event, a story worth sharing. And for those who manage to raise it into its final form, the memory of that long search becomes part of the bond they share with their Pokémonday. In a region defined by its landscapes and mysteries, the encounter with Dreepy stands as one of the most rewarding challenges a trainer can face. Among the many mysteries of the Galar region, there is one Pokémon whose power does not come from raw strength, fiery breath, or elegant wings. Instead, its uniqueness lies in its ability to transform into nearly any opponent it faces, copying not only appearance, but also moves and abilities. That Pokémon is Ditto. While it may look like little more than a simple blob, its rarity and exclusivity in Galar make it one of the most frustrating catches for aspiring trainers. In this region, the only natural location where it can be found is the Lake of Outrage, tucked away in the wild area, beyond stormy skies and jagged rocks. This exclusivity means that trainers must progress far into their journey before having any hope of encountering one. The Lake of Outrage itself requires the Rotom Bike's water riding upgrade to cross, so the earliest attempts to find this Pokémon come only after significant progress. By that point, players may have already wondered if it was missing from Galar entirely, only to discover that it hides in one of the most dangerous and competitive ecosystems in the wild area. Even when standing among the jagged stone circles that define the lake's landscape, the odds of encountering it are slim. Its spawn rate is low compared to the many other Pokémon that populate the grass and overworld in this area, meaning that trainers will often run into repeated encounters with Hydreigon's pre-evolutions, fairy types, and other strong creatures before they ever stumble upon the amorphous blob they are searching for. The experience becomes one of patience, where each battle brings the possibility of success, but usually ends in disappointment. For many, hours can pass without even a glimpse. The rarity feels intentional, as if the designers wanted this Pokémon to represent exclusivity and challenge. Its unique breeding potential only adds to that reputation. Because it can pair with nearly any compatible partner to produce offspring, it quickly became essential for players hoping to breed competitive teams or shiny hunt. In this way, it serves as both a wall and a gateway. Trainers who put in the effort to catch one are rewarded with the ability to create endless eggs, while those without it are locked out of one of the most important systems in the game. This makes the hunt feel not just optional, but necessary for anyone who wants to fully explore what Galar's mechanics have to offer. From a lore standpoint, this Pokémon's presence in such a mysterious area is fitting. The Lake of Outrage already feels ancient and otherworldly, with its stone formations resembling monuments from a forgotten civilization. To place a shapeshifter there reinforces the sense of mystery, as if the Pokémon itself belongs to a more ancient time when the world's forms were still malleable and undefined. This narrative layering turns the act of encountering it into something more than a simple catch. It becomes part of the region's mythos, connecting gameplay mechanics with atmospheric storytelling. Trainers often share stories of the struggle to find one. Some describe battling through dozens of encounters, each time hoping to see the familiar purple blob materialize, only for yet another dragon or dark type to appear. Others recall the surprise of finally seeing it after hours of monotony, the sudden jolt of excitement breaking through the calm repetition of encounters. For many, the eventual capture is less about the battle itself, since its combat strength is not particularly high, and more about the relief that the hunt has finally ended. In the competitive community, this Pokémon's importance cannot be overstated. Its transformation ability allows it to act as a wild card, capable of turning the tide of battle simply by becoming whatever opponent it faces. More importantly, its role in breeding has made it a staple in nearly every serious trainer's collection. Players hoping to breed Pokémon with perfect stats rely on it to serve as a universal partner, and shiny hunters depend on it to create eggs with greater odds of rare coloration. In this way, the challenge of catching it becomes directly tied to the pursuit of excellence, and its scarcity in Galar raises the stakes for those goals. Interestingly, the community has also created myths and stories around the process of hunting this Pokémonday. Some claimed that it appeared more frequently during certain weather patterns at the Lake of Outrage, while others swore that running in specific circles around the stone formations increased the odds. While these superstitions rarely held any truth, they reveal how players turned the difficulty into a communal puzzle, searching for hidden methods to tilt the odds in their favor. The fact that such theories persisted highlights just how challenging the encounter really was. Design-wise, the simplicity of this Pokémon contrasts sharply with the difficulty of its capture. While it may appear as little more than a smiling blob of jelly, the impact it has on gameplay systems is immense. This contrast creates a unique bond between trainer and Pokémon. Behind the humble form lies one of the most valuable partners in all of Galar. In a way, its rarity reinforces that theme, reminding players not to underestimate appearances. Ultimately, The difficulty of catching it in Galar comes down to exclusivity, low encounter rates, and its immense value once obtained. It is not the sort of Pokémon that trainers seek for its combat strength alone, but for the countless opportunities it unlocks through breeding and strategy. The process of hunting it in the Lake of Outrage tests patience and persistence, rewarding those who endure with a creature that reshapes how they approach the game. Within the calm waters and ancient stones of that mysterious lake, Ditto becomes more than just a simple Pokémonday. It becomes a rite of passage, a challenge that transforms frustration into accomplishment, and one of the most memorable hunts in all of Galar. Among Galar's many regional forms, one stands out as both familiar and strange, blending nostalgia with a new twist. That Pokémon is Galarian Far-fetched. It takes the classic image of the leek-carrying bird from earlier regions and transforms it into a more rugged, determined fighter. While its design may look simple, encountering and raising it in Galar proves to be a challenge few trainers expect. The first difficulty lies in its rarity. Unlike many regional variants that appear consistently in multiple routes, this Pokémon shows up only in specific grass patches along Route 5 and in certain areas of the wild area. Even in those locations, its spawn rate is surprisingly low, often drowned out by more common birds and fighting types. Trainers frequently find themselves running into the same handful of opponents over and over while waiting for the chance to meet this stubborn bird. Because it appears walking visibly in the overworld rather than purely as a random grass encounter, there is a unique tension in scanning each patch of ground, hoping to spot the distinctive leak held firmly in its wings. Once it is finally caught, the challenge does not end. Evolving this Pokémon into Far-fetched requires one of the most unusual conditions in the series. It must land 3 critical hits in a single battle. Unlike straightforward level-ups or simple item use, this evolution relies on both luck and planning. Trainers need to prepare by equipping it with items like the leek or scope lens, which increase the odds of landing critical hits, and then seek out battles with opponents sturdy enough to withstand multiple attacks without fainting too quickly. Even then, the process can be unpredictable, with battles ending too soon or critical hits failing to land. Many players describe the experience as more frustrating than enjoyable, but also rewarding once the condition is finally met. The rarity of its evolution method creates a strange relationship between trainer and Pokémonday raising. It becomes less about grinding levels and more about carefully orchestrating battles. Trainers often remember the exact fight in which the evolution occurred, treating it like a milestone in their journey rather than just another step in filling the Pokédex. This makes the eventual Far-fetched feel particularly earned, as if it required not only patience, but also a degree of cleverness and strategy to achieve. From a competitive perspective, the evolved form gained attention for its unique typing and access to powerful moves. But even before reaching that stage, the base form carried its own appeal. Its naturally high attack stat made it stronger than many would expect, and its striking new design turned heads. Yet its usefulness in battle never overshadowed the difficulty of obtaining and evolving it. Trainers who showed up to tournaments with a Far-fetched on their team were immediately recognized for the effort they had put into raising it, which gave the Pokémon a reputation that extended beyond its actual performance on the battlefield. In terms of design inspiration, this regional variant reflects Galar's emphasis on chivalry, knighthood, and the idea of honor in combat. Where the original form from Kanto was depicted as quirky and even a little silly, this one is portrayed as proud and determined, its leek transformed from a simple vegetable into a weapon of focus and dignity. The unusual evolution condition mirrors that thematic shift, as if the Pokémon must prove its worth through decisive strikes before it can ascend to the role of a knight. That blend of lore and mechanics adds to its mystique, making it one of the most thematically consistent regional forms in the series. Players often share stories of their struggles both to find and to evolve this Pokémonday. Some recount hours spent on Route 5, resetting weather conditions in the wild area just to increase the odds of encountering one. Others describe the nerve-wracking process of trying to line up the 3 critical hits, sometimes failing repeatedly as the Pokémon fainted or ended the battle too early. These shared frustrations became a bonding point for the community, turning the bird into a symbol of persistence and determination. In this way, it carried the same cultural weight as many legendary encounters, even though it was technically just a regular wild Pokémonday. Its rarity also led to a degree of superstition within the community. Some players claimed that battling certain types of opponents made the critical hits more likely, while others insisted that specific weather conditions boosted its spawn rate. Although these theories were often disproven, they demonstrate the sense of mystery that grew around this Pokémon's unique conditions. Trainers searching for shortcuts were grasping for any method to reduce the inherent randomness, which only underscored how unpredictable the process really was. Ultimately, the difficulty of catching and evolving this Pokémon lies not only in numbers, but in design philosophy. By making it rare to encounter and difficult to evolve, the developers ensured that it would not be just another regional form passed over by players rushing to fill their Pokédex. Instead, it became a memorable part of the journey, one that required intentional effort to obtain. The process of raising it into Far-fetched captures the heart of what makes Pokémon so enduring: the stories of persistence, frustration, and eventual triumph that turn digital creatures into lifelong memories. For trainers wandering through the fields of Galar, spotting the determined silhouette of Galarian Far-fetched is more than just another encounter. It is the beginning of a unique trial, one that blends rarity, chance, and skill into a single experience. And for those who succeed, the proud knightly form that follows stands as proof of patience and strategy, making this bird one of the most distinctive and difficult catches in all of Galar. Among Galar's dragons, some tower over the land with legendary presence, while others lurk in shadows awaiting discovery. One of the smallest, yet hardest to encounter, is a tusked dragon that hides deep within the wild area's rocky environments. That Pokémon is Axew, though its name is emblazoned on a landmark called Axew's Eye. The irony is that it does not actually appear there. Instead, it resides in more secluded corners of the wild area, making it an elusive prize for dedicated hunters. This Pokémon can be found in the Dusty Bowl and Giant's Mirror, 2 areas defined by their rugged terrain and unpredictable weather. Even here, the encounter rates are remarkably low. In certain conditions, its appearance may hover around 10% or less, buried beneath more common spawns such as Noibat, Onyx, and other sturdy creatures of the caves. For trainers searching blindly, the odds can feel crushing. Hours can pass with only common encounters, and the faint hope of seeing the green, tusked dragon remains just out of reach. The scarcity is compounded by the influence of weather. Some weather patterns, like clear skies or sandstorms, reduce the odds of its appearance even further. Players often find themselves checking forecasts and adjusting their in-game calendar to increase their chances. While this tactic can improve odds, the frustration remains. The wild area's constantly shifting weather makes predictability difficult, ensuring that this Pokémon retains its reputation as one of the hardest dragons to encounter. The reward, however, is significant. Its evolutionary line leads to Haxorus, a dragon type renowned for raw physical power and ferocity. Trainers who manage to find Axew know they are on the path to raising one of the most intimidating battlers in Galar. Haxorus has long been valued in competitive play for its high attack stat and access to moves like Dragon Dance and Earthquake. To reach that level of strength, however, requires patience in both finding and training its unevolved form. The design of Axew strikes a balance between approachability and menace. With large eyes and a small frame, it looks harmless at first glance, but the tusks protruding from its jaw hint at the destructive potential waiting to be unleashed in its final evolution. This contrast makes its rarity even more fitting. A Pokémon that begins so small and innocent deserves to be hidden, only to reward those who dedicate themselves to the search. Community stories often highlight the long and frustrating hunts. Trainers share anecdotes of wandering through Giant's Mirror during rainstorms, fainting dozens of common spawns before finally encountering the elusive dragon. Others describe stumbling across it by accident, realizing only later how rare their encounter truly was. These shared tales contribute to the mythology of Axew's rarity, making it a symbol of persistence in the wild area. Ultimately, the challenge of finding this Pokémon in Galar is tied not only to numbers, but to atmosphere. The wild area's open design amplifies the sense of uncertainty, with weather, spawns, and luck all working together to obscure the dragon from view. Yet when it finally appears, the moment feels unforgettable. Trainers who succeed earn more than just a powerful partner. They earn a story of triumph over one of Galar's most elusive hunts. When the Isle of Armor expansion opened its gates, trainers were thrilled to explore new terrain filled with wetlands, caves, and grassy fields. Amid the abundance of species, one addition quickly stood out for how deceptively elusive it was to encounter. That Pokémon is Goomy. While it looks harmless and even a little fragile, its rarity in Galar made it one of the most challenging creatures to track down. This Pokémon appears primarily in the soothing wetlands and training lowlands, areas teeming with life. Yet its spawn rate is remarkably low, leaving many trainers to wander endlessly without success. Even when weather conditions seemed ideal, the chances of spotting it were slim. For those unaware of the mechanics, it often felt invisible, hidden behind an overwhelming number of more common encounters that dominated the wetlands. The rain further complicates the hunt. This Pokémon is tied heavily to wet conditions, meaning that it will rarely appear outside of rainfall. While weather cycles are frequent in the Isle of Armor, waiting for the right one often tests a trainer's patience. Even after the skies open up, there is no guarantee that it will emerge. Some players spend hours looping through patches of grass in the rain, only to come away empty-handed. Part of the allure of this Pokémon is its potential. Though it begins as a fragile partner, it evolves into Gudra, a powerful dragon type with a reputation for resilience in battle. This contrast makes its rarity all the more striking. The idea that something so small and seemingly harmless could grow into a powerful ally enhances the sense of reward for those who finally succeed in catching it. Trainers who endure the long search often form a particularly strong bond, remembering the moment of discovery as one of their defining memories from the Isle of Armor. The design choice behind this Pokémon emphasizes charm. Its soft body and innocent appearance make it immediately endearing, which only increases the demand among players. Shiny hunters take this one step further, as its alternate coloring provides an additional challenge layered on top of its already difficult spawn conditions. Capturing one with a rare coloration becomes a badge of honor, proof of both persistence and luck. Within the community, stories of this Pokemon's rarity quickly circulated. Players shared tales of wandering in the rain for hours, sometimes days, before seeing it at last. Tips and theories spread widely, with some suggesting specific corners of the wetlands were more promising than others, while others swore by camping tricks to reset weather cycles. Though most strategies offered no guaranteed results, they reflected the communal determination to find one of the Isle's most sought-after Pokémonday. Ultimately, what makes this Pokémon difficult to obtain is not just the low encounter rate, but the atmosphere surrounding its search. The steady rainfall, the quiet wetlands, and the anticipation of spotting movement in the grass all create a feeling of suspense. The reward is not only the creature itself, but the story of perseverance that comes with it. Among the many trials in Galar, the rarity of Goomy on the Isle of Armor stands out as a challenge that transforms persistence into triumph. Some Pokémon in Galar test patience, not through strength but through creativity, and none embody this better than Milcery. At first glance, it seems like a cheerful, simple addition to the roster, yet behind its sweet exterior lies one of the most unusual challenges in the region, blending rare encounters with one of the strangest evolution methods in the series. This Pokémon can be found in locations like Route 4 and certain wild area fields, though its encounter rate is unexpectedly low. Surrounded by more common species, it often feels as if it hides in plain sight, appearing only after long stretches of repeated battles. Because it is small and unassuming, many trainers overlook it entirely, mistaking the lack of spawns as bad luck rather than rarity. Catching it, however, is only the first hurdle. To evolve this Pokémon into Alcremie, a trainer must complete a peculiar ritual involving a sweet item and a spin. Sweets can be collected from battle cafes scattered across Galar, and once held, the trainer must spin their character in circles. The duration, time of day, and direction all determine the final form of Alcremie. With dozens of potential outcomes, this mechanic forces players into experimentation, often repeating the process multiple times to achieve the form they want. The sheer variety of possible evolutions makes this Pokémon uniquely complex. Alcremie can take on over 60 distinct appearances, each differing in color and decoration. Completionists who aim to collect every form face a daunting task, requiring patience far beyond what is asked for by most other species. The spinning mechanic, playful though it is, becomes a test of both persistence and memory, as trainers try to keep track of what they have already achieved. Despite the frustration, the design of this evolution method reflects Galar's culture of celebration and food. It transforms evolution into a light-hearted ritual, one that feels connected to the cafes and sweets that define the region's charm. Trainers who finally succeed in producing their desired form often describe a mixture of relief and delight, recalling the spinning animation as both silly and satisfying. In competitive play, Alcremie's supportive abilities gave it a valuable niche, particularly with moves that boosted allies or fortified defenses. However, the difficulty of achieving specific forms meant that many trainers had to work with whatever result they received, adding unpredictability to its use. For shiny hunters, the challenge became even greater. Milcery's alternate coloring is subtle, and combining it with the specific spin mechanics required for Alcremie turned the process into one of the hardest goals in the generation. Within the fan community, countless myths arose about how to manipulate evolution. Some believed that spinning clockwise produced rarer forms, while others claimed that weather or location influenced the outcome. While these theories were rarely grounded in fact, they reflected the communal spirit of experimentation as trainers compared results and celebrated unusual findings. The Pokémon became more than just another catch. It became a shared cultural experience. In the end, what makes this Pokémon one of Galar's hardest to obtain is the combination of rarity, creativity, and persistence. The act of spinning to evolve it captures the playful heart of the franchise, while the difficulty ensures that trainers will never forget the moment they succeeded. Its sweetness hides a challenge that demands patience, and that balance makes Milcery one of the most memorable parts of the Galar journey. Deep within the glowing forests of Galar lies one of the most mischievous creatures in the entire region. That Pokémon is Impidimp. At first glance, it may not seem particularly rare, especially since it can be encountered at a 100% rate within its chosen home. But rarity in Galar is not always about numbers. In this case, it is about exclusivity, atmosphere, and the strange tricks that perception can play when searching for a Pokémon hidden in plain sight. This Pokémon appears only in Glimwood Tangle, a forest unlike any other in the series. The environment is lit by bioluminescent mushrooms that glow in shifting colors, casting strange shadows along the paths. The twisting layout of the area gives the impression of a maze, where even experienced trainers can lose their sense of direction. It is in this dreamlike landscape that Impidimp waits, and though it is technically guaranteed to appear in the grass, its exclusivity to this one location means that many trainers miss it altogether. Without exploring the forest thoroughly, it is possible to leave without ever realizing the mischievous imp was there. For many players, the illusion of rarity comes from the atmosphere itself. The glowing mushrooms and dim lighting make it harder to notice small movements in the grass. Combined with the forest's unusual music and unsettling design, the environment makes each encounter feel unpredictable. Trainers expecting to see more familiar Pokémon often describe feeling surprised when Impidimp emerges, leading them to assume that it must be rare. Over time, this assumption became part of the community's folklore, with many claiming it was among the hardest to find, even though it is technically present in every battle within the Tangle. The exclusivity of this Pokémon is significant because of what it represents. As the first dark and fairy type ever introduced, it carries with it a sense of innovation. The typing allows for unique strategies in battle, balancing mischievous trickery with raw power. Its evolutionary line culminates in Grimmsnarl, a towering figure that became a staple in competitive play thanks to abilities like Prankster and access to support moves such as Reflect, Light Screen, and Thunderwave. But the only way to begin this journey is by catching Impidimp in its exclusive forest, ensuring that players must wander through Glimwood Tangle's glowing paths if they hope to raise one. Design inspiration also plays a role in why this Pokémon feels elusive. It embodies elements of European folklore, particularly tales of goblins, fae, and trickster spirits said to lead travelers astray in enchanted woods. By confining it to Glimwood Tangle, the designers created a thematic link between myth and gameplay. The forest itself feels like a fairy tale setting, and finding Impidimp within it reinforces the impression that the player has stumbled into a story rather than a simple encounter. The exclusivity becomes a reflection of the creature's lore. It exists only where trickery and mystery thrive. Trainers often recall the experience of encountering this Pokémon with vivid detail. Some describe wandering for long stretches, convinced that it was not present at all, only to finally see its impish grin. Others recall stumbling upon it almost immediately, not realizing how unusual the encounter felt to others until they compared experiences online. These stories highlight how perception shaped its reputation. Though it could always be found in Glimwood Tangle, the forest's unsettling design created the feeling that it was hiding, waiting to play tricks on those who passed by. In competitive contexts, this Pokémon's value further enhanced its perceived rarity. Trainers who managed to raise Grimmsnarl gained access to one of the most versatile support options in doubles formats. The sight of one on a team often signaled experience and preparation, reinforcing the idea that owning Impidimp was more than just luck. It was a deliberate achievement tied to understanding the game's deeper mechanics. Even though catching it was technically easy within its habitat, the association between exclusivity and competitive strength made it feel special. Community myths quickly formed around hunting methods. Some players believed that Impidimp appeared more often if trainers walked in circles around specific glowing mushrooms. Others swore that encountering Spritzee or Morgrem first increased the odds of seeing the mischievous imp. While these theories held no truth, they show how players created folklore around what was already guaranteed. The desire to explain perceived rarity turned the hunt into a shared cultural experience, where even a common encounter felt like a mystery waiting to be solved. Ultimately, what makes this Pokémon one of the hardest in Galar is not mathematical scarcity, but exclusivity and perception. Its home in Glimwood Tangle ensures that only those willing to explore the glowing forest will find it. The atmosphere, combined with its folklore-inspired design, creates the impression of something elusive, even though it is always present. For trainers, the discovery feels like a reward for wandering into the heart of mystery, transforming a technically common Pokémon into one of the most unforgettable catches of the region. Few Pokémon in Galar capture the region's cultural identity as neatly as one based on tea. Found within delicate porcelain cups, this Pokémon blends whimsy with a touch of eeriness, representing the balance of charm and ghostly folklore that defines so much of Galar's aesthetic. That Pokémon is Sinistea. While even the base form can be tricky to encounter, what truly cements it as one of the hardest catches is the near impossible odds of finding an authentic specimen. In Galar, this Pokémon dwells in Glimwood Tangle, an already mysterious location with its glowing fungi and shifting paths. Simply encountering one requires patience, as it is not as common as some of the forest's other inhabitants. Trainers might wander through the misty undergrowth for long stretches, encountering Morgrem, Spritzee, or Swirlix repeatedly, before finally seeing a teacup hover faintly in the darkness. The eerie atmosphere of the forest adds weight to the encounter, making it feel less like a random battle and more like stumbling upon something supernatural. Yet for most trainers, the initial capture is only the beginning of the challenge. This Pokémon comes in two forms, phony and authentic. At first glance, there is almost no visible difference. The phony form represents the vast majority of encounters, while the authentic form has a tiny hallmark stamped on the underside of its cup. This subtle distinction makes the authentic variant exceedingly rare, with odds as low as 1% in the wild. As a result, trainers who aim to find one must either endure endless encounters or rely on sheer luck to stumble upon the correct variant. The authenticity mechanic is one of the most unusual in the franchise. It is not tied to shiny coloration, nor is it an alternate form that dramatically changes stats or movesets. Instead, it exists as a nod to craftsmanship and quality, echoing real-world traditions of porcelain and tea culture. In many ways, this design choice makes the authentic form feel more special than many shinies, since its rarity is less about visual spectacle and more about subtle detail. Trainers who discover they've caught an authentic specimen often describe the moment as surreal, realizing only afterward how incredibly unlikely the encounter had been. The rarity is further amplified by evolution. To transform into Polteageist, this Pokémon requires the use of either a cracked pot or a chipped pot, items that themselves are divided between phony and authentic forms. Using the wrong item results in failure, making the process even more confusing for players unfamiliar with the system. Locating the correct pot can be almost as difficult as finding the authentic Pokémon itself, since these items are scattered in limited locations or sold randomly in antique shops across Galar. The entire process creates a layered challenge, first locating the Pokémon, then confirming its authenticity, and finally obtaining the proper item for evolution. From a lore perspective, the concept fits perfectly into Galar's world. Tea is an iconic part of the culture, and the idea of a ghostly presence inhabiting porcelain reflects the region's fascination with blending the everyday with the supernatural. The authenticity mechanic echoes stories of counterfeit antiques, where only the trained eye can distinguish the genuine from the imitation. This connection to folklore and tradition elevates the rarity from a gameplay quirk to a cultural statement, making it one of the most thematically resonant challenges in the series. Trainers who dedicate themselves to finding an authentic form often describe the hunt as one of the most grueling tasks they have ever attempted. Some report catching hundreds of phony forms before finally encountering the real thing. Others discover their authentic specimen only by chance, often without realizing what they had until they examined the Pokédex entry more closely. In either case, the rarity transforms the encounter into a lasting story, one that players share with pride in communities and forums dedicated to the hunt. Competitive players valued Polteageist for its offensive capabilities, particularly its access to Shell Smash, a move that allows it to sweep teams with terrifying speed and power. However, the phony and authentic forms share identical stats, meaning that in battle, the distinction is meaningless. What mattered was the symbolism. Owning and raising an authentic one became a badge of honor, proof that a trainer had endured the painstaking process of finding something extraordinarily rare. In tournaments and online battles, simply showing off one carried an unspoken prestige that went beyond win rates or strategies. The cultural impact of this rarity extended into myths and superstitions. Some players swore that authentic forms appeared more often in certain parts of the Tangle, while others believed that fainting large numbers of phony forms increased the odds. Rumors circulated that specific weather conditions or times of day influenced spawns, though these claims rarely held up under testing. Even so, the persistence of these ideas demonstrates how deeply the hunt captured players' imaginations. Searching for an authentic Sinistea became more than a task, it became a shared obsession that blended fact, fiction, and folklore. Design-wise, the subtlety of authenticity is brilliant. Unlike flashy shinies or alternate forms with obvious changes, the hallmark requires patience and attention to detail. It forces trainers to slow down and engage with the game in a different way, examining what they have rather than rushing to the next encounter. This slower, more deliberate style of play reflects the calm ritual of tea itself, tying the gameplay directly to the cultural inspiration. In this sense, the rarity is not arbitrary but purposeful, encouraging reflection and appreciation rather than instant gratification. Ultimately, what makes this Pokemon one of the hardest to catch in Galar is not just its low encounter rate, but the sheer improbability of obtaining an authentic form. The challenge lies in the combination of patience, persistence, and luck, as well as the cultural weight carried by the idea of authenticity. Trainers who finally capture one often hold on to it dearly, treasuring it not only for its rarity, but also for the story of the search. In a region full of dragons, legends, and myths, this tiny teacup stands out as a reminder that even the most delicate things can hold extraordinary value. For those who wander the glowing paths of Glimwood Tangle, the encounter with Sinistea remains one of the most elusive and unforgettable experiences in all of Galar. Among the many Pokemon that highlight the uniqueness of Galar's design, there is one whose rarity is not simply about low encounter rates, but about exclusivity and subtle differences between its forms. That Pokemon is Indeedee. Known for its caring demeanor and psychic abilities, it is unusual not only for where and when it appears, but also for the fact that its male and female forms differ significantly, with each tied to specific versions of the game. This exclusivity turns an otherwise modest-looking Pokemon into one of the hardest to fully collect in the region. In Galar, this Pokemon can be encountered in locations such as Glimwood Tangle and certain routes, but its appearance is far from common. The chances of stumbling across one are relatively low compared to the many other inhabitants of those areas. Trainers often find themselves battling through waves of more common, fairy, and psychic types, hoping for a chance to see the calm and attentive figure emerge from the grass. Its rarity alone would have been enough to make it a tricky addition to the Pokédex, but the complications do not end there. The true challenge lies in its gender differences. Unlike most Pokemon, where male and female forms are nearly identical aside from small cosmetic variations, this species has distinct appearances, personalities, and even battle strategies depending on its gender. The male form is more focused on support roles, while the female form leans toward offensive utility. This distinction is further reinforced by each form being tied to different versions of the game. Players with Pokemon Sword primarily encounter the male form, while those with Pokemon Shield primarily encounter the female. As a result, no single playthrough allows a trainer to obtain both forms naturally. This requirement forces either multiple versions of the game or trades with other players, a barrier that adds significant difficulty to collecting the full set. For casual trainers, this exclusivity often goes unnoticed until later in their journey, when they realize that their Pokédex entries remain incomplete despite hours of searching. For completionists, however, it quickly becomes a source of frustration. Trading is the only consistent solution, but not every player has access to online features or friends with the opposite version. This makes the search for both forms one of the more difficult tasks in Galar, especially for those determined to complete their regional decks without assistance. From a design standpoint, the differences between the two forms reflect the region's emphasis on subtlety and detail. The male's upright posture and calm expression suggest a nurturing caretaker, while the female's more active stance hints at initiative and action. Both roles tie into the Pokemon's lore as a partner that attends to trainers' needs, adapting based on personality. The decision to split the forms between versions emphasizes the idea that not every journey in Galar is identical. Two trainers may walk the same paths, but encounter very different partners, adding to the sense of individuality that defines the region. In competitive play, this Pokémon gained recognition as a strong support option, particularly in doubles formats. Its ability, Psychic Surge, creates a psychic terrain upon entering battle, boosting the power of psychic-type moves and preventing priority attacks. This effect synergizes with a wide range of strategies, making it a valuable asset on many teams. The distinction between male and female forms added another layer of strategy, with the female often favored for its higher offensive potential. Yet the rarity of each form in the wild meant that building a team around it was not as simple as catching the first one encountered. Trainers seeking the optimal form often had to go to great lengths, whether through breeding, trading, or carefully manipulating encounters. Stories of the hunt for this Pokémon often emphasize the confusion surrounding its gender exclusivity. Many players initially assumed that, like most species, both forms could be found in the same game, with enough persistence. After hours of fruitless searching, they eventually turned to online guides, only to discover that their version lacked the form they wanted entirely. The realization that an entire form was locked behind a different version created both frustration and a sense of challenge. Those determined to collect both had to either coordinate with others or invest in multiple copies of the game, a commitment that underscored just how rare the full set truly was. The cultural impact of this exclusivity can be seen in how the community responded. Forums and trading groups frequently included requests for the opposite form, turning the Pokémon into a symbol of cooperation. Trainers would offer common creatures in exchange, happy simply to complete their collections. This communal aspect mirrors the Pokémon franchise's original intention of encouraging players to connect and trade, but in this case, the exclusivity pushed the idea further, making it one of the most talked about version differences of the generation. The rarity also ties into the themes of Glimwood Tangle, one of the places where it can be found. The glowing forest already feels magical and elusive, and encountering this Pokémon within it feels like discovering a guardian spirit watching over the land. The fact that not every trainer will see the same form reinforces the idea that the forest adapts differently to each journey. It becomes a place where exclusivity feels natural, as if the forest itself decides which version of the Pokémon to reveal. Ultimately, what makes this Pokémon one of the hardest to catch in Galar is not simply its encounter rate, but the layered challenge of gender differences and version exclusivity. To truly say one has completed the hunt requires not just persistence, but also cooperation, trading, and a willingness to go beyond a single adventure. For many trainers, the journey to collect both forms became a story in itself, filled with frustration, surprise, and eventual triumph. In a region where rarity often defines the most memorable experiences, the challenge of Indeedee stands as a reminder that sometimes the hardest catches are not those that hide in caves or rain, but those locked away behind the choices of the game itself. Galar is home to many regional forms, each reimagining familiar Pokémon through the lens of the region's culture and lore. Some highlight strength, others celebrate resilience, and a few embody haunting reminders of fragility. One of the most striking examples is a ghostly coral that reflects both environmental collapse and spectral beauty. That Pokémon is Galarian Corsola. While it does not hide behind extremely low encounter odds, its exclusivity and dependence on weather make it one of the harder catches in the region. This Pokemon is available only to those who play Pokemon Shield. Trainers with Pokemon Sword cannot find it naturally in their game, forcing them to rely on trading if they want to add it to their collection. This exclusivity immediately elevates its difficulty, especially for completionists determined to fill the Pokédex on a single cartridge. Without access to online features or a trading partner, acquiring this Pokemon becomes nearly impossible. The exclusivity alone ensures that it will always stand apart from more commonly available species. Even for Shield players, the encounter is not straightforward. It can be found in the Giant's Mirror within the wild area, but only when the skies are overcast. This weather condition is not as rare as fog, but it is still unpredictable. Trainers may visit the Giant's Mirror repeatedly, only to find the weather uncooperative. Even when conditions align, the encounter rate is around 10%, which means that patience is still required. Many players describe wandering through the grass while running into far more common Pokemon, waiting for the pale coral to finally appear. The haunting design of this Pokemon deepens the impact of its exclusivity. Unlike the vibrant pink coral of its Kanto counterpart, the Galarian form is pale and lifeless, its branches broken and spectral. The Pokédex explains that it is the result of environmental destruction, with the life drained from coral reefs until only a ghost remained. This darker interpretation struck many fans as a poignant reflection of real-world issues, giving the encounter weight far beyond its role as a collectible. The rarity of finding it in overcast weather mirrors its lore, a fragile remnant, difficult to see and easy to lose. Once caught, the significance of this Pokemon grows through evolution. When it becomes Corsola, it gains immense special attack power and access to unusual moves like Strength Sap, which weakens foes while restoring health. Competitive players quickly recognized its niche, using it both as a wall and as a surprise attacker. Having access to Corsola became a point of prestige, particularly because it required first capturing the rarer Galarian Corsola. The exclusivity and weather dependency ensured that not every trainer could obtain it easily, making its presence in battle feel earned. Stories from the community often emphasize the frustration of the hunt. Some trainers recount returning to Giant's Mirror day after day, resetting the in-game date in hopes of producing overcast weather. Others describe walking through the grass for long stretches, encountering Pokemon like Linowone or Hatchram repeatedly before finally seeing the pale coral emerge. These moments of frustration gave way to relief and pride, with many sharing screenshots online to celebrate the capture. The rarity became part of the Pokemon's identity, not just in lore but in lived experience. Myths and superstitions grew around the process, as they often do with rare encounters. Some players claimed that encountering Cufant or Baltoy first improved the odds of seeing Galarian Corsola. Others insisted that fainting a certain number of wild Pokemon in the Giant's Mirror increased its chances of spawning. While none of these theories were confirmed, they reflect how players responded to the challenge by creating explanation. The myths became part of the cultural experience, turning the search into a ritual of hope and persistence. From a design perspective, the decision to tie this Pokemon to specific weather feels deliberate. Overcast skies already create a somber, gloomy atmosphere in the wild area, and encountering the ghostly coral within that setting reinforces its identity. It feels less like a random spawn and more like a spirit that emerges only when the world itself seems muted. This blending of gameplay and storytelling ensures that the rarity is not arbitrary but thematically resonant, making each encounter memorable. Ultimately, what makes this Pokemon one of the hardest to catch in Galar is the combination of version exclusivity and environmental dependency. Sword players cannot obtain it without outside help, and even shield players must wait for the right conditions. The design ensures that the encounter will always feel special because it reflects themes of fragility, persistence, and environmental loss. For trainers who succeed, the capture is more than just a step toward completing the Pokédex. It is a haunting memory of patience rewarded. In a region filled with dragons, legends, and myths, the pale coral of Galar stands quietly among the hardest, its ghostly presence a reminder that rarity can be as much about meaning as it is about numbers. Some Pokemon test a trainer's patience with low encounter rates, while others require the right weather or version of the game. Yet few creatures in Galar demand such a deliberate, puzzle-like process as one tied to ancient stone and whispered lore. That Pokemon is Spiritomb. Introduced in earlier generations as a mysterious entity bound to an odd keystone, it returns in the Crown Tundra expansion with a method of acquisition that is as tedious as it is fascinating. In the Crown Tundra, trainers first discover a peculiar gravestone near the Dyna Tree Hill. Interacting with it reveals cryptic messages, hinting that something unusual can occur if certain conditions are met. Unlike a typical wild encounter, this Pokemon does not appear simply by wandering in tall grass or fishing in lakes. Instead, trainers must complete a specific requirement, speaking to a large number of other players in the wild area and Crown Tundra. Only after fulfilling this condition will the gravestone change, allowing the rare encounter to occur. At first, many players did not realize what the gravestone signified. Messages from the stone seemed vague, and without guidance, it was easy to assume that nothing more would happen. The discovery of the requirement spread slowly, with early players experimenting and comparing notes online. Eventually, it became clear that to summon this Pokemon, one had to interact with 32 unique trainers in the overworld. This number is no coincidence. It directly references the original requirement in the Sinnoh region, where players had to speak to 32 people in the underground to unlock Spiritomb in Diamond, Pearl, and Platinum. By recreating this condition in Galar, the developers tied the encounter back to its origins, reinforcing the sense of continuity and tradition. Completing the requirement is far from simple, depending on a player's connection and the activity of others in the wild area. Finding 32 distinct trainers can be time-consuming. For those without access to consistent online play, the challenge becomes even greater, sometimes bordering on impossible. This restriction quickly turned the encounter into one of the most exclusive in the entire region, with many players left unable to complete it without outside help. For others, the process became a long, drawn-out scavenger hunt, wandering through the Crown Tundra in search of new figures to greet. The rarity of this Pokemon's appearance feels fitting, given its lore. It is said to be a collection of souls bound to a keystone, manifesting as a malevolent spirit. The idea that so many interactions are needed to summon it mirrors this concept, as if gathering enough connections or voices somehow awakens the entity. This blending of gameplay and story design creates a memorable experience, transforming the process from a frustrating checklist into a narrative ritual. Even the location, a gravestone hidden near a massive, ancient tree, reinforces the atmosphere of mystery and haunting tradition. Trainers who finally succeed in summoning this Pokemon often describe the moment as surreal. After hours of speaking to other players, they return to the gravestone to find its message altered, hinting that something has changed. Approaching it again triggers the encounter, and for the first time, the elusive spirit emerges. Unlike random battles that can occur at any moment, this encounter feels earned, as if the trainer has completed a secret ritual known only to the most dedicated explorers. From a competitive standpoint, this Pokémon carries a unique combination of strengths. Its dark and ghost typing gives it valuable immunities, and its balanced stats allow it to function as both an offensive threat and a defensive wall, depending on the moveset. In particular, its access to moves like Will-O-Wisp and Foul Play makes it a nuisance for physical attackers, while its bulk gives it surprising staying power. Trainers who manage to obtain one not only gain a rare collectible, but also a versatile team member. Yet the competitive advantages pale compared to the prestige of simply owning one, since the method of obtaining it is so demanding. Community myths and superstitions quickly spread about easier ways to complete the requirement. Some players believed that speaking repeatedly to the same trainer would count, while others suggested that non-player characters could fulfill the quota. Neither turned out to be true, but the persistence of these ideas highlights just how eager fans were to bypass the tedious process. Entire guides and videos appeared online, offering strategies for quickly locating 32 unique trainers. Even so, the process remained daunting, cementing this Pokémon's reputation as one of the most elusive in Galar. The cultural impact of this encounter is significant. Spiritomb already had a reputation from its earlier appearances as one of the hardest Pokémon to obtain, and the Crown Tundra encounter reaffirmed that identity. Fans who remembered the Sinnoh method appreciated the callback, while new players discovered firsthand the patience required to unlock it. This combination of nostalgia and novelty gave the encounter an added layer of meaning, making it one of the standout experiences of the expansion. Design-wise, the Pokémon itself embodies its difficulty. With its eerie face emerging from a swirling mass of spirits, it looks every bit as unnatural as its method of summoning. Its design suggests something ancient and bound by ritual, and the requirement to gather many voices before it can be encountered reflects that identity perfectly. It feels less like a wild Pokémon and more like a supernatural event, something hidden behind lore and secrecy rather than chance. Ultimately, what makes this Pokémon one of the hardest to catch in Galar is not the randomness of its appearance, but the deliberate challenge set by its unique puzzle. Unlike rare spawns or weather-based encounters, this one requires active engagement with the community, patience in gathering enough interactions, and persistence in returning to the gravestone to confirm success. The result is an encounter that feels more like uncovering a secret than simply filling a Pokédex entry. Trainers who endure the process remember it vividly, their persistence rewarded with a Pokémon whose very existence embodies rarity, mystery, and tradition. In a region full of hidden gems and elusive legends, the ritual of summoning Spiritomb stands as one of the most demanding and unforgettable trials. One of the most distinctive aspects of the Galar region is how the conditions of the environment shape the difficulty of encounters. More than any previous setting in the series, this land ties its Pokémon to the natural world in ways that can make some catches feel nearly impossible. Weather, overworld visibility, and random grass battles all play crucial roles in determining which species appear and when. For many trainers, these mechanics turned an already expansive region into a maze of shifting possibilities, where patience and luck mattered as much as preparation. Perhaps the most influential system is weather. Unlike earlier regions, where day and night cycles determined encounters, Galar introduced a more complex structure where conditions such as sun, rain, snow, hail, sandstorms, fog, and thunderstorms directly altered the Pokémon available in each location. This system made the wild area feel alive, constantly shifting from one visit to the next, yet it also created moments of frustration. A trainer seeking a particular Pokémon might arrive at the right location, only to find the weather unsuitable, forcing them to either wait for the natural cycle to change or manipulate the in-game calendar. Rare weather types such as fog became infamous for their role in gating access to scarce species like Dreepy, making some encounters feel like once-in-a-lifetime events. Rain, too, played a significant role in determining rarity. Certain species, including Goomy on the Isle of Armor, appeared almost exclusively when the skies opened up. This forced trainers to plan hunts carefully, waiting for storms to roll across the wetlands before beginning their search. While the dynamic weather added realism, it also meant that finding some Pokémon became a matter of timing as much as location. Players often shared tips on how to adjust system dates to trigger desired conditions, transforming what could have been a frustrating wait into a deliberate strategy. The balance between overworld encounters and random grass battles also shaped rarity. Galar's introduction of visible overworld spawns marked a major shift in how trainers searched for Pokémonday. For the first time, many species could be identified before engaging, reducing unnecessary battles. However, this also meant that some Pokémon were tied exclusively to one method or the other. For example, Impidimp appeared more commonly as random grass encounters in Glimwood Tangle, while others, like Galarian Far-fetched, often roamed visibly in fields. Trainers who were not aware of these distinctions sometimes wasted hours in the wrong encounter type, missing the species they sought entirely. This split created a subtle but important layer of difficulty, turning knowledge into a crucial tool for success. The wild area's open structure magnified these challenges. Unlike traditional routes, where encounters were more predictable, the wild area combined multiple weather conditions with overlapping spawn tables. A trainer could stand in one patch of grass during sunny skies and see nothing unusual, only for rain to transform the same location into a completely different ecosystem. This unpredictability gave the wild area a sense of wonder but also frustration. Completing the Pokédex required careful attention to both the environment and the mechanics that governed it. Another factor that influenced rarity was level scaling. Some Pokémon only appeared in the overworld at higher levels, meaning that early exploration of the wild area would not reveal them. Players had to return later in their journey, sometimes after obtaining key upgrades like the Rotom Bike's ability to ride on water. This progression-based gating made certain encounters feel special, but also stretched out the timeline for completing collections. Trainers, eager to catch everything early, often felt locked out by invisible barriers. Grass encounters, though less visually dramatic than overworld spawns, carried their own challenges. Many rare Pokémon were tied almost exclusively to grass battles, forcing trainers into repetitive encounters with common species while hoping for luck. Feebas on Route 2 exemplified this frustration, with its appearance limited to specific water tiles that had to be fished repeatedly. Similarly, Sinisteia's phony and authentic forms could only be differentiated through careful inspection after capture, turning what looked like a simple encounter into an extended process of trial and error. These mechanics made the grass feel like a lottery machine, where persistence and chance were the only tools available. The Isle of Armor and Crown Tundra expansions expanded these mechanics further. On the Isle, the frequency of rain directly influenced the appearance of certain dragon types, while the Crown Tundra introduced puzzles and rituals that went beyond weather entirely, such as the interactions required to summon Spiritomb. These expansions highlighted how Galar's designers leaned into environmental storytelling, making rarity feel like an organic part of the land rather than a purely mechanical obstacle. The expansions also reinforced the importance of overworld versus grass encounters, with some species hiding almost exclusively in one method across new zones. Culturally, these mechanics shaped how the community approached hunting. Forums and online groups became dedicated to sharing weather charts, spawn guides, and tips for manipulating conditions. Trainers coordinated their efforts, reporting which dates triggered fog or thunderstorms, and which routes offered the best odds for elusive species. This cooperative atmosphere turned the difficulty into a communal challenge, where success was shared across the fan base. The frustration of spending hours waiting for the right weather often gave way to celebration when someone finally encountered a rare Pokémon, reinforcing the sense of accomplishment. From a design perspective, these mechanics emphasized patience and planning. Instead of guaranteeing encounters through simple exploration, Galar asked trainers to pay attention to details: the state of the sky, the method of encounter, the level of progression, and even the subtle differences between forms. This complexity deepened the sense of immersion, making each catch feel like a reflection of the environment rather than a random event. At the same time, it highlighted the tension between wonder and frustration, as trainers often felt at the mercy of forces beyond their control. Ultimately, what makes regional catching conditions one of the hardest aspects of Galar is how many layers they add to the hunt. Weather, overworld visibility, grass encounters, level scaling, and hidden form distinctions combine to create a region where patience is as important as skill. The result is a land where every rare Pokémon carries with it not just the story of its design or lore, but the memory of the environment in which it was found. Whether it was waiting for fog to roll in, spinning endlessly for Alcremie, or fishing on the right tile for Feebas, trainers came to understand that rarity in Galar was inseparable from the land itself. And in that realization, the challenge of catching became more than just a task. It became an experience woven into the very fabric of the journey. When Galar first released, trainers set out with excitement to complete their Pokédex, only to discover that many beloved species were missing. This absence sparked debate and disappointment, as the national dex had always been a point of pride for collectors. Months later, the Isle of Armor and Crown Tundra expansions arrived, and with them came not only new areas to explore, but also a dramatic shift in availability. These additions redefined the rarity of countless Pokémon, making some easier to find while introducing new layers of challenge for others. The Isle of Armor was the first expansion, and it immediately stood out for its lush landscapes, rolling fields, and wetlands teeming with life. With this expansion, more than 100 returning species became obtainable in Galar for the first time. For many trainers, the sense of relief was palpable. Creatures that had once required transfers from older games could now be found natively. However, rarity did not vanish with availability. Some Pokémon, like Goomy, remained extremely difficult to encounter despite being present on the Isle. The wetlands, where it appeared, often swarmed with more common species, and its reliance on rainy weather further complicated the search. The expansion demonstrated how rarity was not simply about inclusion in the Pokédex, but about how environmental conditions shaped encounters. The Isle also introduced unique mechanics that influenced difficulty. Battle cafes, which handed out sweets necessary for Milcery's evolution, became a daily routine for players. While not tied to spawn rates, these mechanics added another layer of persistence. Trainers aiming to collect all forms of Alcremie found themselves returning repeatedly, combining the rarity of the base Pokémon with the unusual ritual of spinning evolutions. The Isle expanded Galar's ecosystem, but also reinforced the region's philosophy that rarity could take many forms, whether through weather, mechanics, or evolution requirements. The Crown Tundra arrived later, bringing with it a harsher environment of snow, ice, and ancient ruins. This expansion added more than 100 additional Pokémon, completing Galar's roster of returning species. But while many were now obtainable, the Crown Tundra introduced puzzles and rituals that made some of them among the hardest catches in the entire franchise. Spiritomb became the most famous example, requiring players to interact with 32 different trainers in order to unlock its appearance at a gravestone near the Dyna Tree Hill. This was a direct homage to its original method of acquisition in Sinnoh, and it became one of the most challenging hunts in Galar. The expansion also reintroduced the Regis, legendaries first seen in Hoenn, through puzzle-based shrines scattered across the snowy landscape. Trainers had to solve riddles, arrange patterns of lights, and even make choices about which forms to pursue. These encounters demonstrated how rarity could be tied not just to spawn rates or weather, but to intellectual effort and decision-making. The challenge was not in endlessly battling through grass, but in understanding clues and unlocking doors. This approach diversified the definition of rarity, turning some catches into multi-step trials. Another major addition of the Crown Tundra was the Dynamax adventures. These cooperative raids allowed players to encounter a wide range of legendary Pokémon, many of which were previously unavailable in Galar. While these encounters guaranteed access to powerful species, the process was far from simple. Trainers had to navigate randomized paths through multiple battles, conserving health and moves along the way. The legendary Pokémon at the end of each path had a low shiny rate, which turned shiny hunting in Dynamax adventures into one of the most time-consuming pursuits in the series. The availability of so many legends was balanced by the immense patience required to find rare variants. The expansions also changed how players approach the overall concept of rarity. Before their release, some species like Ditto were considered among the hardest to find, locked to a single location with low encounter rates. With the DLC, breeding became easier thanks to the broader access to species and items, reducing the sense of scarcity for certain lines. At the same time, the addition of new rare Pokémon shifted attention to the challenges of the expansions. Trainers who once spent hours fishing tiles for Feebas now found themselves dedicating just as much time to unlocking Spiritomb or chasing shiny legendaries in Dynamax adventures. Culturally, the expansions reignited enthusiasm for exploration. Players shared maps, guides, and tips for locating elusive species in the new areas. The Isle's wetlands and the Crown Tundra's icy expanses became gathering points for community discussion, much like the wild area had been at launch. The cooperative nature of Dynamax adventures further encouraged interaction as groups of trainers teamed up to face difficult paths together. In this way, the expansions not only changed availability, but also fostered a renewed sense of community, making the pursuit of rare Pokémon a collective experience. From a design standpoint, The expansions highlight how Game Freak blended accessibility with challenge. By restoring hundreds of species, they ensured that fans could once again see old favorites in the modern engine. But by tying some of the most iconic Pokémon to puzzles, rituals, or cooperative modes, they kept the spirit of rarity alive. The result was a balance where common Pokémon became more available, while legendary or thematically important species remained elusive. This duality reflected the franchise's long-standing tradition of mixing easy catches with daunting trials. Ultimately, the Isle of Armor and Crown Tundra expansions redefined rarity in Galar. They shifted the balance of which species were obtainable, introduced new mechanics that demanded persistence, and layered puzzles and rituals onto the hunt for specific Pokémonday. For trainers, the expansions provided both relief and challenge relief in knowing that more species were accessible, and challenge in facing some of the most elaborate methods of acquisition in the series. In this way, the expansions did not simply expand the region's map, they deepened the experience of rarity itself. Trainers who braved the wetlands, solved the riddles of ancient ruins, and endured countless Dynamax adventures discovered that rarity in Galar was not just about numbers or odds, but about stories of perseverance written across both the base game and its expansions. Every Pokémon generation inspires stories, tips, and myths among players, but Galar stands out as a region where rarity and difficulty fueled entire waves of community speculation. The combination of dynamic weather, version exclusives, unusual evolution methods, and expansion puzzles gave trainers countless reasons to invent explanations for why certain Pokémon felt so elusive. Over time, these theories became almost folkloric, with some players swearing by their accuracy and others dismissing them as little more than superstition. Regardless of truth, these myths reveal how the struggle to catch Pokémon became a communal experience, uniting fans in shared frustration and triumph. One of the most persistent myths centered on weather manipulation. Trainers who hunted Dreepy in the Lake of Outrage often believed that foggy weather could be forced by setting the switch to specific calendar dates. This trick did indeed work, but it became wrapped in layers of misinformation. Some insisted that leaving the console running overnight increased the odds, while others claimed that standing in particular patches of grass improved chances once the fog rolled in. These beliefs transformed the search for Dreepy into a kind of ritual, with players swapping lucky dates and debating which ones truly worked. Even after the mechanics were understood, the folklore persisted because the shared stories gave weight to what might otherwise have been a simple technical exploit. Sinistea inspired another wave of myths, mostly tied to its authentic form. Because the difference between phony and authentic variants was so subtle, many trainers developed theories about how to improve the odds of finding the rarer form. Some believed that encountering Sinistea near certain mushroom clusters in Glimwood Tangle improved chances. Others swore that catching them at night yielded more authentic cups than in the daytime. None of these ideas were ever proven, but they spread widely, reflecting the desperation of trainers who had already caught dozens of phony forms without success. The rarity of authenticity turned the search into something akin to ghost hunting, with stories circulating about the right ways to summon the true form. Feebas, long infamous for its rarity across generations, carried its own set of myths into Galar. Because it appeared only on specific tiles of water on Route 2, some players insisted that fishing in different directions, casting toward the center versus the edges, influenced results. Others believed that the number of times one reeled in a Magikarp before finding Feebas changed the odds, as though persistence alone could bend the mechanics. Though the truth lay in the hidden design of encounter tiles, these myths made the process feel like solving a puzzle passed down from veteran trainers. For new players, the myths gave a sense of tradition, linking their frustration to a wider history of Feebas hunts stretching back to Hoenn. The unusual evolution of Milcery into Alcremie also spawned countless superstitions. While the official mechanics were known spinning while holding a sweet item, with time of day and spin duration influencing the result, players layered their own interpretations on top. Some claimed that spinning in specific towns produced rarer forms, while others suggested that weather outside of battle affected the evolution. Videos circulated of players performing elaborate spinning dances, convinced that a special motion would yield their desired form. Even though the process was entirely mechanical, the myths around it turned evolution into performance art, reinforcing the playful spirit that defines the Pokémon itself. Impidimp and its rarity in Glimwood Tangle also gave rise to folklore. The forest's eerie lighting made encounters feel unpredictable, and some players reported seeing clusters of Morgrim appear before finally encountering the impish Pokémonday. This led to theories that fainting certain species in sequence would call Impidimp into battle. Others believed that using fairy-type moves in the forest increased the odds of seeing one, tying gameplay mechanics to narrative themes of fairies and goblins. None of these theories held up under scrutiny, but they reveal how players sought meaning in randomness, turning frustration into stories that could be shared and retold. The expansions added their own layers of community myth. Spiritomb's puzzle in the Crown Tundra quickly became a hotbed of speculation. Some trainers, struggling to interact with 32 unique players, wondered if non-player characters could count toward the total. Others claimed that fainting wild Pokémon near the gravestone triggered the encounter, or that visiting at night improved the odds. The real method was clear, yet these theories reflect the desperation of trainers who wanted shortcuts through the tedious process. The myths themselves became part of the cultural experience, reinforcing the sense that summoning Spiritomb was less about mechanics and more about ritual. Even common Pokémon sometimes developed a reputation for hidden conditions. Stories circulated that Galarian Far-fetched required not only 3 critical hits to evolve, but also that these hits had to occur in specific types of battles. Some insisted that the opponent needed to be a wild, fighting type, while others believed that gym battles counted more than random encounters. Though incorrect, these myths highlight how players tried to impose order on luck-based mechanics, giving themselves the sense that success was possible if only they followed the right ritual. What makes these myths so compelling is how they reflect the community's relationship with difficulty. Rarity in Galar was often about patience and luck, systems that left players feeling powerless. Myths gave back a sense of control. By following certain rituals, trainers could believe that they were improving their odds, even if the mechanics said otherwise. The myths also created opportunities for storytelling. Sharing theories, debating their accuracy, and celebrating lucky encounters became social activities, weaving individual frustrations into a shared cultural memory. From a design perspective, it is fascinating to see how randomness naturally creates folklore. When the chance of encountering a Pokémon is 1% or lower, players will inevitably begin to see patterns in the noise. A long dry spell followed by success convinces trainers that some action must have triggered the change. This human tendency To find meaning in randomness transforms gameplay into storytelling, where the numbers themselves matter less than the experience of chasing them. Ultimately, the cultural and community myths of Galar highlight how rarity is not just about mechanics, but about perception. The search for rare Pokémon became a social experience, with myths serving as both coping strategies and communal entertainment. Trainers may never agree on whether foggy dates truly matter for Dreepy, or if certain mushroom patches are luckier for Sinistea, but the stories themselves endure. They are passed along as part of the shared memory of Galar, shaping how players remember the region long after they have completed their collection. In the end, what defines the hardest Pokémon to catch in Galar is not only their low spawn rates, exclusivity, or unusual requirements, but also the myths that grew around them. These stories reveal the emotional weight behind rarity, the frustration, hope, and relief that make each successful catch unforgettable. For trainers, the myths became part of the adventure, turning mechanical challenges into folklore that will be retold for years to come.